I opened my eyes, expecting darkness. Instead, sunlight spilled across a lavish bedroom, the kind only belonging to someone who never knew a single financial worry in their life. I sat up slowly. My body was small, delicate, unfamiliar. A child's body. My child's body. Then it hit me. The memories of a life filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and regret came crashing in. And alongside them, a shocking realization. I am reborn. The first clues arrived quickly. A framed photo on the nightstand. A smiling man with dark hair and easy charm, standing beside a woman whose elegance could rival any queen. And me. Tiny, blonde, perched between them like some perfect family portrait. No way. I remembered him. My cheating ex, the man who shattered my heart and left me alone in the ruins of what I thought was love. And now, decades later, I was his daughter? I touched my small hands, trembling. This has to be some kind of joke. But it wasn't. Breakfast came with a polite knock. A nanny entered, smiling warmly. Good morning, sweetie. Your father and stepmother are downstairs waiting for you. I froze. Father? Stepmother? The mind reels, but my heart sharpened. Not with fear. Not with sadness. With calculation. I had two options. Despair at my new, twisted fate, or use it. And of course, I chose the latter. By mid-morning, I had assessed the house. Sprawling, pristine, full of servants loyal to appearances rather than morality. Every corridor, every room, every meal became a playground for observation. I would learn their habits, their weaknesses, their secrets. And I would use them. Because I wasn't just going to survive here. I was going to ruin the perfect family from the inside. That night, as I lay in bed, I wrote my first plan. Step 1. Observe. Learn everything about father, stepmother, and the house. Step 2. Identify allies and pawns. Step 3. Infiltrate their perfect family without revealing my intent. I smiled faintly. My tiny hands had never felt more powerful. Decades of pain had culminated in this moment. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the strategist. And the game had just begun. Morning in the Maddox house smelled of citrus and something expensive enough to make my old landlord twitch with envy. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. A breakfast spread fit for a magazine cover gleamed on the table. And at the center of it all sat the two people who had once ruined me in different ways. My ex, now my father, and his new wife, who smiled like sunrise and measured like a judge. The nanny fussed at my hem while my step-siblings chattered about school clubs and piano recitals. I listened. I catalogued. A child's attention looks harmless. In my head it was reconnaissance. Good morning, Daisy, my father said, and hearing his voice from so close, calling me by this name, felt like someone had pressed a bruise. Charming, practiced. The same voice that once excused and enticed and left. He glanced at me the way a man scans a market. Quick, interested, never invested. He didn't recognize what I'd become. Stepmother, Elise, I think her name is, bent to adjust my toast plate with none of the tenderness she once showed my ex when they were newly intimate. Her smile was perfect, her eyes, shrewd as glass. She poured coffee into my father's cup and then leaned in to murmur something that made him laugh. I watched the microtransaction of power in their interaction. Joke, validation, minuscule body language exchange. It's amazing how many small betrayals are shared over warm memories. My first assignment was obvious. Map the house, map individuals, map loyalties. The nanny, sweet Mrs. Giles, was loud with affection and sloppy with her keys. She overprotected the house like it was both sanctuary and shrine. That kind of devotion can be weaponized or bought. The butler, Mr. Hargreaves, slid into the room with the quiet authority of someone who had been guarding the family's dignity a little too long. He watches people like a hawk. Eyes like that are useful. They see when the curtains twitch. And then there were the kids. My siblings were exactly what I expected. Two carefully groomed little heirs to an image. The elder, Thomas, wore entitlement like a second skin. The younger, Rosie, giggled at everything and whose trust would be the easiest to win. Kids are mirrors, you smile, they smile back. You look concerned, they grow wary. I planned to reflect carefully. During art class that afternoon, I started subtle experiments. May I use the blue brush? I asked Rosie when she held it a little too possessively. She blinked, offered it like a tiny queen impressing a new courtier, and I accepted with exaggerated gratitude. "You're so generous," I whispered, drawing Rosie into the orbit I was quietly establishing. By the time we painted the canvas, she was leaning on my shoulder like a loyal puppy, ready to betray a secret for a cookie. At lunch, I practiced conversation with my father. "School's interesting," I said innocently, then tilted my head. "Who do you like at the office now, Daddy? Who has your trust?" He chuckled, smooth. "People change, Daisy. I value loyalty." He didn't ask what I meant. Of course he didn't. The man who hurt me loved platitudes more than curiosity. That was his cloak. I filed it away. Elise caught my eye across the room, and for a heartbeat I imagined the girl I once was, the one who cried over men who left. Then I pushed the image away and became strategizer again. Elisa's smile toward the staff was warm, but her fingers tapped a rhythm on the table that hinted at impatience. Impatience can be leveraged. It cracks under stress. By midweek I had my first data packet of household behavior. The routes each servant took, what time the pantry door latched most loosely, who answered the private line when Dad was traveling. Small things, none of them explosive alone. But together they were a map of vulnerability. At dusk I staged my first deliberate mischief. Not sabotage, not yet, but the sort of seed that grows into doubt. I accidentally left a toy in the study with a scribbled doodle that matched a sketchbook my ex used to carry in college. He noticed. He picked it up, smiled that absent smile that made my old heart lurch, and then set it down as though it meant nothing. But Mr. Hargreaves raised an eyebrow. A tiny, meaningful movement. Observation logged. A week in, and I had allies where allies mattered most. Rosie's affection was mine. The nanny liked my shy confessions and would do anything for me. Mr. Hargreaves was interested. His habitual glance had shifted from neutral to curious. Curiosity is the first stage of suspicion. Suspicion is the first stage of change. That night, tucked in the too fluffy duvet, I reviewed my notes. There was a thrill in the arithmetic of it. Small influences producing micro shifts in behavior. It suited me. Revenge had never been about dramatic reveals. It was patient. Surgical. I smiled in the dark. In my last life I'd been undone by someone else's perfection. In this life, I'd become intimate with imperfection. The tiny fissures hiding under glossy veneers. Tomorrow, I would plant a second seed. A whispered misplaced email in the household account that hinted at a neglected bank transfer. A rumor that might coax Elise into a late-night argument with my father. A chink to pry, not smash. For now, I closed my eyes on the cheap lullaby the nanny hummed and felt a new kind of warmth. One that wasn't love. It was patience. It was power. And it would be far, far sweeter. By the second week in the Maddox household, I was no longer an observer. I was a silent influence. Every interaction, every glance, every whispered instruction became part of a carefully calculated map of power. The servants, the children, even my father and stepmother, each had patterns, weaknesses, and blind spots. And I intended to exploit all of them. But subtly, carefully, without revealing the strategist beneath the innocent child's face. My first target was the staff. The house was too polished, too orderly. Servants who moved like clockwork rarely noticed deviations. But where discipline thrives, gossip simmers. That gossip could be leveraged. At lunch, I accidentally overheard Mrs. Giles complaining about the new chef's temper. I asked innocently, "Does he always get so grumpy?" Her eyes lit up, and she began venting. Perfect. By listening carefully, I discovered who disliked whom, who secretly resented the rules, and who could be persuaded to follow my direction, all without raising suspicion. The first shift was subtle. A misfiled silver spoon here, a whispered forgotten delivery there. Small things, seemingly innocent, that tested loyalty and obedience. Reactions were catalogued meticulously. Meanwhile at school, I discovered the first crack in the family's perfect facade. Thomas Maddox, my elder brother, was brilliant, but arrogant and unaware that his new little sister had been reborn with decades of strategic experience. He flaunted grades, charm, and influence among teachers and peers. During art class, I deliberately left a small sketch of him. Exaggerated, awkward, and humorous, where he might notice it. His face flushed red, a mix of embarrassment and fury. That small, controlled humiliation wasn't cruel. It was a test, How would he react to a subtle challenge? Predictable. By the end of the day, Thomas had begun overcompensating, correcting small mistakes, showing off unnecessarily. Every overreaction was logged in my mental notebook. Every overreaction could become a lever. Stepmother Elise, meanwhile, revealed her first genuine vulnerability. She was perfection in motion, graceful, charming, polite, but her ego was fragile. A compliment to her husband would trigger subtle insecurity, while a suggestion to consider my opinions would stir irritation. I discovered it by presenting a small, innocent art critique from school. Elise bristled, a small frown betraying her otherwise composed demeanor. Observation complete. That night, I began plotting. Step 4. Exploit cracks in perfection. Test reactions without revealing intent. Allies. Rosie, Mrs. Giles. Leverage. Thomas's arrogance, Elisa's fragile ego. Goal. Seed distrust and small chaos without detection. I smiled quietly in the dark. I could see it clearly now. My father's perfect family was anything but. Beneath the golden veneer were flaws, fissures, and cracks. And I intended to widen them, carefully, surgically, invisibly. The thrill of control, the sweetness of subtle revenge, warmed me in a way heartbreak never could. The game had begun in earnest. Morning would bring new opportunities. A misplaced note, a whispered rumor, a tiny act of rebellion orchestrated to seem accidental. Every small move was a thread, every thread a lever, and every lever a step toward dismantling the family that had once hurt me. Because this time, I wasn't the powerless ex-girlfriend. I was the daughter. I was the strategist. And I would win. By now, the Maddox household had become a chessboard, and I, the smallest piece with the sharpest mind, was beginning to move unseen. The first step in my plan: create small tensions that could grow into chaos without anyone suspecting me. Morning routines were my playground. The nanny, Mrs. Giles, adored me. A perfect pawn. A whispered worry about a missing vase here, a softly dropped comment about someone arriving late there, and I began testing her loyalty. She was predictable, protective, obedient, and eager to cover up anything that might reflect badly on me. The butler, Mr. Hargreaves, was next. He carried the household's authority quietly, but every gesture and glance revealed his biases. I learned quickly. Plant doubt in the right ear at the right moment, and even the most stoic servant becomes a tool. I started with my father. He prided himself on control over business, family, appearances. So I planted a subtle clue in his schedule. A note that suggested Elise had double-booked an event with conflicting attendees. I knew he would notice, then hesitate. Frustrated but unwilling to confront her directly. Perfect. Tension seated. Observation logged. Elise, unsuspecting, immediately reacted when I innocently mentioned her scheduling error while brushing my hair. Her eyes flickered with irritation. I smiled faintly to myself. The first domino had fallen. Then came Thomas. I discovered that a certain essay he had been overly proud of had been misfiled. I accidentally corrected it, making minor but noticeable adjustments that subtly undermined his perfectionism. Thomas, as predicted, began overcompensating, correcting others unnecessarily, showing off in front of teachers, and growing impatient with siblings. I catalogued everything. His pride, now rattled, was a lever I could pull later. Meanwhile, Rosie, the youngest sibling, became my greatest ally. She adored me without suspicion. A whispered secret here, a shared snack there, and she became a reliable informant, a tiny mirror reflecting the household's movements and emotions. Every smile, giggle, and frown she passed along was logged and analyzed. She was unknowing, innocent, and invaluable. By evening, I staged my first deliberate incident with maximum subtlety. A supposedly lost family letter, left in plain sight but actually planted by me, suggested a minor miscommunication between Elise and my father. By the time they discovered it, they were already suspicious of each other's intentions. A small argument broke out. Quiet, tense, contained, yet unmistakable. And I watched, outwardly innocent, inwardly triumphant. Later that night, tucked in my lavish bed, I reviewed the day's accomplishments. Step 5. Small disruptions, invisible to adults. Exploit personality flaws. Thomas's pride, Elisa's ego, Dad's need for control. Build chaos gradually. I smiled faintly. Revenge was sweet, but subtle revenge, calculated over days, weeks and months, was exquisite. The Maddox household, once a perfect facade, now had its first cracks. And every crack promised opportunity. I closed my eyes, imagining the days to come. Whispered rumors in hallways, misaligned schedules, minor embarrassments, and the perfect illusion that it was all coincidence. The family would never suspect that the small, seemingly innocent daughter was the mastermind behind the slow unraveling. For decades, I had been powerless. Now I had all the time in the world. And I would make sure every moment counted. The game had begun, and I was already winning. The Maddox household had begun to bend, imperceptibly, to my will. Little cracks were showing in the polished veneer, small arguments sprouted from subtle nudges, and even the adults were reacting to the tiny disturbances I orchestrated. But nothing lasts without resistance. And resistance had arrived. It started with Elise. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, lingered on me a little longer at breakfast than usual. "Daisy," she said casually, but with a tone that carried subtle warning, "have you been exploring areas you shouldn't?" I tilted my head, lips curved in innocent confusion. "Oh, I just walked past the library. Isn't it okay for me to see the books?" Her gaze sharpened. "Of course. Just be careful." She had noticed the pattern. Not the content, not the manipulation, but the unusual curiosity. My first real opponent. Then came my father. He had always trusted his carefully constructed world, believing everyone played by the rules he set. But over the past week, he had begun to notice the coincidences. Missing items returned mysteriously, minor disruptions that seemed too strategic to be random. When he asked, I smiled sweetly. "I don't know, Daddy. Maybe I just got lucky?" Luck, I mused quietly. Always the most dangerous word when used correctly. Thomas was next. My little prank with his essay had escalated beyond my expectations. He had begun to suspect someone was watching, judging, subtly undermining him. His behavior grew erratic, correcting, boasting, testing boundaries. Perfect. His pride made him predictable, but pride also made him impatient. And impatience is exploitable. That afternoon, I tested my first countermeasure. I accidentally knocked over a vase in the hallway near Elise's office, apologizing profusely. Her sharp intake of breath told me she was suspicious, but she accepted my apology. By placing myself in the open, appearing innocent, I distracted her from noticing the patterns I had woven elsewhere. Simultaneously, I whispered a small warning to Rosie. "Don't tell anyone I was near the office today." "Okay." Rosie nodded earnestly. Her loyalty was now mine. Every observation she shared would be filtered, every reaction catalogued. By evening, I realized something crucial. Step 6. Resistance reveals weakness. Opponents give away their patterns when they try to control what they don't understand. I smiled in the dark. Elise's suspicion, my father's curiosity, Thomas's arrogance. All were predictable responses to control they did not realize I wielded. And each tiny challenge only strengthened my understanding of how to manipulate them without detection. Later, I sat in my room, notebook open, reflecting. First real challenge completed. Adults notice anomalies. Must increase subtlety. Use curiosity against them. Maintain innocence. Cultivate trust with allies. I leaned back on the bed and imagined the days ahead. There would be more scrutiny. More suspicion. There would be tests of loyalty, both from the family and the staff. But now I was ready. Not just to survive. Not just to influence. But to reshape the household entirely, turning their perfect facade into my playground. And with patience, cunning and careful observation, no one would ever guess the mastermind was a small, reborn child. The game had escalated. The first real challenge had arrived, and I had already begun to win. By now, I had learned the most important lesson of all in the Maddox household. Influence is not about brute force. It is subtle, invisible, strategic. And I had begun weaving a web that stretched across servants, siblings, and even my stepmother. The first threads were the easiest. The staff. Mrs. Giles, already loyal, now carried my subtle suggestions like gospel. "Did you notice the pantry is low?" I would ask innocently. By the next morning, a shift in orders, a missing ingredient, a slightly frazzled chef, all because I suggested it quietly. The kitchen became my testing ground, a place to observe reactions and plant seeds of doubt. Mr. Hargreaves, the butler, was slower to bend, but curiosity had begun to root. A misplaced silver tray here, a subtle observation about Elisa's schedule there. Enough to make him question, not me, but the household's rhythm. Observation is influence's first step. Suspicion is the second. Then came the children. Rosie, loyal and unguarded, became my miniature informant. She whispered secrets without realizing the value of her words. Thomas, however, required delicate handling. His arrogance was both a weakness and a weapon. Overcorrecting, boasting, and testing boundaries. I catalogued each reaction, storing them like ammunition. One day, those impulses would be leveraged fully, to my advantage. Next, stepmother Elise. Her ego and desire for perfection were the keys. I began planting accidental insights, small suggestions that nudged her toward minor conflicts with my father. Nothing explosive. Nothing obvious. Yet tension rose in the household like a faint tremor beneath marble floors. The first true test came when I placed a subtle note in my father's briefcase, suggesting a meeting had been double-booked. Not true, but plausible. The result, Elise called him in confusion, a minor disagreement arose, and I, the small child, was nowhere near culpable. Even my father began to notice the inconsistencies. He glanced at me suspiciously during breakfast, but I smiled innocently, as though unaware of any intrigue. Observation is power. Innocence is camouflage, I reminded myself. And it worked. By midweek, I began coordinating these small threads into more deliberate patterns. A misplaced cup here, a whispered rumor there. A misfiled ledger that suggested an unintentional error. Servants whispered to each other, siblings quarreled over trifles, and Elise began second-guessing the small decisions she once executed without hesitation. All perfectly orchestrated. That night, in my lavish chamber, I reviewed the day's successes. Step 7. Expand influence quietly. Connect minor tensions to create a chain reaction. Staff and children are tools. Adults' pride is leverage. Remain innocent, observant, and untouchable. I smiled faintly. Every tiny disruption in the household was a proof of my strategy. The perfect family, once untouchable, was beginning to bend under the smallest, subtlest pressures. Pressures I alone had engineered. The thrill was not in chaos itself, but in control. I leaned back on my pillow, thinking ahead. Soon, I would escalate. A rumor strategically placed to stir jealousy, a secret revealed just enough to cause misunderstanding, a minor betrayal suggested to test loyalties. Every move would be calculated. Every reaction anticipated. Because in this house, perfection was fragile, and I held the invisible hand that could fracture it completely. The game was no longer just survival. It was dominance. And I, the daughter reborn from heartbreak, was ready to see just how far I could pull these threads before anyone realized the child in their home was the one weaving the chaos. The Maddox household was starting to hum with tension. Small fractures, invisible to most, had begun widening. And for the first time, one of my carefully planted seeds bore fruit. It started with Thomas. I had subtly hinted to him that a school competition would reflect poorly if he failed to prepare properly. His pride, already frayed by previous minor embarrassments, erupted. He spent the entire day over-practicing, correcting younger students, and snapping at his parents over trivial matters. Elise noticed first. "Thomas, must you always behave this way?" she said, her voice strained with frustration. "My sister keeps interfering," he snapped, unaware I wasn't the one he blamed. Perfect. Rosie, my tiny ally, watched in wide-eyed admiration as I defended her from Thomas's outburst. "Oh, don't mind him," I said softly, "he's just stressed." Rosie hugged my arm. "You're always so smart, Daisy." The affection was mine to harvest. Her loyalty was now cemented. Then came my first test with Elise herself. Earlier that week, I had accidentally dropped a hint that a minor household expense had been mishandled. A fabrication, subtle enough to sound plausible. Elise confronted my father, seeking to correct the imaginary mistake. The tension between them was nearly imperceptible at first. But by the evening, it had blossomed into a whispered argument in the study, walls echoing small but clear signs of frustration. From my vantage point, invisible and innocent, I logged every movement, every inflection, every micro-expression. Step 8. Small lies, large effects. Keep hands clean, play observer, let others do the work. The real victory came at dinner. Thomas, still flustered from the competition prep and my subtle provocations, accidentally knocked over a glass of wine onto the new carpet in front of Elise. "Oh, Thomas!" she gasped, rushing to clean it. I, of course, was nearby with Rosie, providing the perfect innocent distraction. Thomas's pride shattered quietly, Elise's composure rattled, and my father, who valued control above all, became visibly unsettled by the tension he couldn't immediately correct. It was beautiful. Later, in my chamber, I reflected. First major victory. Household tension increased without suspicion. Family dynamics shifting in my favor. Allies remain loyal. Staff still unaware. Innocence preserved. I allowed myself a small triumphant smile. Decades of heartbreak, humiliation, and betrayal had led me to this moment. And now, I was not just surviving. I was winning. But victories are never without risk. Elisa's sharp eyes were growing more attentive. My father's suspicion was barely perceptible but present. Even Thomas's arrogance might adapt to challenge me. I had to be careful. Every step forward required patience, calculation, and subtlety. And yet, the thrill of influence was intoxicating. The household, once flawless, was now bending. Small cracks had become small chasms. And each day, each small move, each whispered suggestion, brought me closer to the ultimate goal. Turning the perfect family into a house of chaos under my control. I closed my eyes that night, letting the satisfaction sink in. For the first time in decades, I felt powerful. Not as a victim. Not as a girl scorned. But as the daughter who had outwitted everyone under her roof. And this was only the beginning. The Maddox household was no longer simply tense. It was becoming a powder keg, and I was holding the lit match. Morning began with careful observation. I watched Elise move through her morning routine, noting each gesture, each pause, each micro-expression. Her attention to perfection was absolute, but her ego was brittle. Every minor disruption I introduced, every hint of imperfection, forced her to overcompensate, subtly, invisibly. My father, meanwhile, remained calm outwardly, but I could see the strain in his eyes when schedules didn't align perfectly or a minor miscommunication occurred. Control, he realized, was slipping through his fingers, and no one yet realized why. Thomas, still recovering from his recent humiliation, was easier than ever to manipulate. I whispered a small comment about the favoritism the household staff showed me. Thomas, blinded by pride, instantly interpreted it as an insult, and began to challenge small household rules, testing boundaries, and arguing with Elise over trivial matters. Perfect chaos. Rosie remained my constant ally. "Did Thomas really mean that?" she asked innocently after a minor scolding. I tilted my head, shrugging. Maybe he didn't. But sometimes people act without thinking, right? Her wide eyes mirrored trust and admiration, giving me not just insight, but influence over her perception of the household. By afternoon, I had begun planting more strategic misunderstandings. A misplaced envelope, supposedly containing important family documents, appeared on Elise's desk. A note suggesting an error in the household accounts, a complete fabrication, was subtly delivered to my father. I watched quietly as Elise's careful composure faltered for a brief moment. My father, observing, frowned and questioned her decisions. The first sparks of discord I had intentionally ignited were now flickering into flames. During dinner, the results became evident. Elise questioned one of my father's financial decisions aloud, subtle enough to seem spontaneous, but carefully guided by my planted evidence. Thomas interrupted her twice, frustrated, only to be corrected sharply by my father. The household hierarchy, once rigid and flawless, wobbled under the strain I had orchestrated. And I sat quietly, Rosie beside me, watching each reaction with satisfaction. That night, I reflected in my chamber, notebook open. Step 9. Escalate carefully. Use small manipulations to create minor conflicts. Exploit pride, fragility and curiosity. Remain innocent. Observe constantly. The thrill of power was undeniable. Each subtle act, each whispered seed, each minor disruption, added layers to the web I was weaving. The perfect family, so long a symbol of my old heartbreak, was now vulnerable to my strategy. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. For decades, I had been powerless. Now, I controlled the narrative, the relationships, the smallest micro-events that dictated the household's balance. And I would continue, carefully, until every flaw, every insecurity, every crack became part of my design. The game was no longer merely survival or minor revenge. It was absolute control, without ever being suspected. And as I lay in bed that night, watching moonlight spill over the polished floors, I smiled faintly. One by one, the pieces fall where I want them. One day soon, the Maddox family will realize. They have been playing my game all along. For weeks, I had been patient. Careful. Every whisper, every misplaced item, every small suggestion had tightened the web around the Maddox household. And tonight, that web would finally snap. It began with the smallest thing. An email. A note, accidentally, sent to my father's assistant, implying Elise had moved a large amount of money from one of his accounts into her private trust. Completely false, of course. Crafted and placed where it would be discovered by the one person guaranteed to panic. By evening, the message had reached him. At first, he said nothing. But the signs were there. The flick of his pen, the tense set of his jaw, the silence that followed every question Elise asked him at dinner. Elise, ever perceptive, felt the shift and began to bristle. I sat quietly at the table, the picture of innocence, sipping my juice as the two adults who once built a perfect empire of appearances finally began to tear at its edges. "Darling, are you all right?" Elise asked lightly. My father didn't look up from his plate. "Fine." A pause. A cold, sharp pause that could cut glass. Thomas stopped mid-sentence, glancing between them. Rosie looked confused, shrinking beside me. And then softly Elise said, "If something's wrong, I'd rather you tell me than sit there brooding." His fork clattered against the plate. "Then perhaps you should stop moving money without telling me." Silence. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elise's face went pale, her composure cracking for the first time since I'd entered this family. "Excuse me." The argument that followed was quiet but vicious, the kind of fight only two people terrified of losing face can have. Each accusation, each defense, each tearful denial echoed softly down the perfect marble halls. And I watched. Rosie pressed closer to me, trembling. I stroked her hair gently, comforting her with a kindness that cost me nothing and bought me everything. By the next morning, the house was different. Tension had turned solid, thick enough to touch. Servants whispered. Thomas avoided breakfast. Elise shut herself in the study for hours, emerging only to speak to Mr. Hargreaves in clipped, anxious tones. My father left early for work and didn't return until well past dinner. And in the midst of the quiet storm, I sat with my sketchbook, drawing quietly as though untouched by the chaos swirling around me. Because I was untouched. I was its architect. That night, I wrote in my notebook, the pen steady in my small hands. Step 10. Mission complete. Family fractured. Trust eroded. Influence established. Maintain innocence. I closed the book and exhaled slowly. The taste of victory was strange. Not sweet, not sharp, but satisfying. Measured. Controlled. The woman I had once been, betrayed, abandoned, powerless, was gone. The child I appeared to be, innocent, fragile, harmless, was an illusion I wielded like a weapon. I had remade myself completely. Days later, the household fell into quiet disarray. Elise grew distant, paranoid, rechecking every statement, every letter. My father threw himself into work, retreating from the tension he couldn't manage. Thomas acted out, blaming everyone but himself. And Rosie, poor Rosie, clung to me for comfort, not realizing she was the only genuinely innocent soul in this mansion of glass. The perfect family had become what I always knew it could be. Hollow. Fragile. Cracked. And I stood at the center, smiling softly, unseen. As I looked out the window one evening, watching the sun sink beyond the immaculate gardens, I whispered to myself, "You wanted perfection. You destroyed me for it. And now you'll choke on it." The words were for my father, for the man who, in another life, had broken my heart and left me to die miserable and forgotten. He would never know who I truly was. He would never realize the revenge born from the child who smiled at him each morning. And that was the beauty of it. I closed my sketchbook, slid it under my pillow, and let the darkness settle around me. The Maddox house would never be the same again. Its perfect family portrait had been smudged beyond repair. And though I was reborn into their world, I had remade it in my image. Quiet, strategic, unstoppable. I wasn't the villain this time. I was simply what the world had made me. A survivor with the patience of a saint and the heart of a tactician. The Maddox house looked the same. On the outside, polished floors, perfect gardens, chandeliers sparkling like frozen stars. Inside it was different. Much different. I walked through the familiar halls, now taller, older, and finally free of the small childish body I had used to manipulate every corner of this house. Every secret, every whisper, every carefully orchestrated move had left its mark. Elise, once pristine and untouchable, had become cautious, quieter, and wary of every little disruption. My father had returned to work, distant and distracted, carrying a permanent tension he couldn't explain. Thomas, proud and arrogant, still struggled to regain the composure I had quietly undermined years ago. Rosie. Rosie had grown into a clever, perceptive young woman, unknowingly carrying the lessons of loyalty and observation I had instilled. And me? I had watched it all. Sitting by the window, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I came back for revenge. I reshaped the perfect family. I won. And yet, the victory was quieter than I expected. There was no applause. No sense of triumph beyond the subtle, lingering knowledge that the household had bent to my will without knowing it. No one knew who had truly orchestrated the shifts in power, the small miscommunications, the seeds of tension that had grown into lasting change. And maybe that was better. I thought of the woman I had been before. Heartbroken. Betrayed. Forgotten. The one who had died believing love and life were cruel. I had been reborn not just to survive, but to conquer. To teach the world that even the smallest voice, even the powerless, could bend giants without ever lifting a sword. A knock at the door brought me back. Daisy, Rosie's voice, grown sweeter and steadier, called softly. Are you coming for dinner? I smiled, a warm, controlled smile. Of course, Rosie. As I walked through the hallways I once ruled from the shadows, I realized something. Revenge had been only the beginning. Patience, observation, subtlety. These were tools I could carry anywhere. I could rebuild, remake, and reclaim in any situation. And perhaps one day, I would find a life where I didn't need to play shadows to win. A life where influence could be wielded for creation instead of destruction. But for now, I let the Maddox household carry the echoes of the chaos I had sown. Every perfectly polished floor, every sparkling chandelier, every tense smile at the dinner table reminded me. I had survived, I had won, and I had mastered the game. And that, in the end, was enough. One who was broken and betrayed can return not just to stand, but to reshape the world around them. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more original novel stories. And stay tuned, our next story is coming soon.